Right. Well, I think it's go time. So, Kelly, do
Oh
you
yeah.
feel comfortable starting? I'm happy to introduce you and whatnot to the audience. All right. Well, I'm just wanting everyone to know too, this is being recorded. So if anyone's uncomfortable with that, you can drop off or whatnot, what you need to do. But yeah, thank you for joining today. Go ahead, Kelly. Yeah, there was a little voice break there, but yeah, this will just be an hour-long AMA, and if anyone has questions, feel free to, interject because I do have a predetermined list of questions to ask Kelly, but I'm happy to pause for any questions from the audience. And I do ask though that if you're not speaking, just to put your mic on mute, just for courtesy. But yeah, and also too, if anyone's interested in getting free passes to Talentland, we have a select number of those that we'll be giving away today. So after the AMA, just let me know if you want one, and I'm happy to set you up. But Kelly, maybe you want to talk a little bit about yourself before we get into the questions? Oh, is it the mic being goofy? Yeah, it's like the left corner of the screen, like where your handle is, there's like a microphone icon. Discord is not the most user-friendly platform sometimes. And just say that Kelly is our director of application security at Bishop Fox, the application security practice rather. And yeah, she's been here for several years. She has a very interesting background in how she got to cybersecurity. She formerly worked in the art world, so that's pretty interesting transition. And she's very into hardware hacking and as well defined radio (SDR). So if you have any interest in radio hacking, ham hacks, as you will, yeah, feel free to ask today. So,
Guess I'll start with the first question in this case. Um, what was the pivotal moment that she decided to get into cybersecurity, and how did she start?
great question. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see what inspires people to actually get into cybersecurity, right? So, I mean, sometimes it's happenstance, but a lot of times it's passion for the hacking community that leads people this way. So, yeah, that's a great first question. Thank you for asking it.
Hey guys, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. We
Yep.
can hear you, Kelly.
Sorry, I had to join from my phone because my laptop, for whatever reason, does not want to hear my microphone.
It's all good. I was having issues earlier too. So, but yeah, you did get a question. Would you mind repeating it, Cyfreak?
All right. So, what was the pivotal moment that made you decide to get into cybersecurity, and how did you start? What did you start using?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was not one of those people that was like, you know, 13 years old and already hacking, but I always had an interest in tech. So it was like video games, building my own gaming PC, doing a lot of like IoT electronics projects at home, like building a smart mirror. So I was already kind of connected to communities that were, let's say, like cybersecurity adjacent. But if there was like one moment for me where I was like, oh, this is really cool, it was probably when I was watching Mr. Robot with my husband. And he said, like, wow, you'd be really good at this. And I always make the joke, like, oh, I don't look good in orange. I don't want to go to jail. And he told me, like, no, people get paid to do this professionally and they don't go to jail. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, pen testing sounds awesome. And this is definitely for me. So I did a lot of self study for like about a year and just kind of dove in the deep end doing stuff like, well, there's no hack the box then, but VulnHub, over the wire, playing any kind of like DTFs that I could get my hands on. And eventually I started doing some certifications. So I did my OSCP, and I was also really lucky to win a scholarship with SANS. And I got to do 3 SANS courses as part of the Women's Immersion Academy. So that really was kind of like what got me started with pen testing.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. All right. Well, that actually kind of bleeds into the first question I had planned, which was, Kelly, can you share a little bit about your background, aside how you got into cybersecurity and Mr. Robot?
Yeah, so I probably have one of the weirder backgrounds of people at Bishop Fox. So I did a career change a little bit later in life into InfoSec. And before I was doing anything security or tech related, I was an art dealer and an appraiser. So I always kind of describe this to people as it was like Indiana Jones meets the Antiques Roadshow. I specialized in Asian art. So I actually sold a lot of like Chinese jade antiquities. So stuff that like came out of tombs and were burial goods, and also kind of, imperial seals like an emperor would use on a document. And my whole job was to buy and sell those things, and people would bring them to me, and I would tell them whether or not it was real or what it was worth. And so, like, very, very different from anything tech related. But I kind of realized that that was not a growing industry. And a lot of my clients were super old people that were dying. And, it may not be surprising to you, but like millennials and Zoomers don't spend $50,000 on a statue. So I was definitely looking for an industry and a career that was like going to be really interesting, where I would never have to like could always be learning something new every day. And like I said, when I found out about pen testing, I kind of knew like, oh, this is my calling.
$50,000 on a statue. That's on my bucket list right there. All right. Thank you for that, Kelly. And so, how did you start getting like more involved in the cybersecurity community? I know in the past you were very involved with your local hackerspace. So, did that play a role?
Definitely. I was kind of hanging out at a hackerspace in San Francisco called Noisebridge, and there were a lot of people who were already members and part of that like worked in security or worked in tech. And so they were really great for kind of like pointing me in the right direction. If you can find a local community, I always recommend that, just because meeting people in person seems to kind of help boost things along a lot faster. But I also did a lot of stuff online. So I participated in a lot of Slack channels, these days, more Discord channels. I also got involved with some subreddits that were related to like learning about security, and basically just like anywhere that I could find people who wanted to talk about security. That was different communities that I was getting involved in. And that helped me a lot to get my foot in the door and, kind of do my big career change.
That's awesome. There's definitely something to be said for like in-person networking for sure. All right, cool. I believe this wasn't on my list of original questions, but I know you can speak to it. What's your opinion on security certifications? Because that's something I see pop up on InfoSec social media all the time.
Oh, you know I have strong opinions on this. Some security certifications are really, really good, right? Like especially any ones that have like a practical hands-on element. Those are awesome. Some of them are kind of the ones that are like more multiple choice tests aren't as good, and some I would say just like aren't well respected in general and probably aren't worth your time because they can be really expensive. So if I was going to say like some good ones, offensive security definitely historically has always had like really great certs. OSCP was a really fun experience for me. SANS also offers some really great trainings and the related GX certifications, but SANS is pretty expensive. Like those certs run $6,000 or $7,000 with the exam. OSCP is actually getting pretty expensive too. So, when I did it, it was like $1,000 out of pocket, but the new subscriptions are like more than double that. That one's getting a little harder for me to recommend in terms of like ones I wouldn't spend a ton of time on. CEH is one that, just maybe isn't going to get you as far for the money. It might have good content for learning, but for like proving to an employer or a hiring manager that you're competent, that one's not going to go as far.
Yeah, I've heard mixed things about the certified ethical hacker certification myself. Um, that one seems to have more of a sort of mixed opinion, but thank you for that. And I believe we do have a question from the audience. Matt Frost, I think you had a question. I know you're
Oh
on
no.
You aren't supposed to.
the.
You aren't supposed to say if you
What'd you say, Matt?
if you were to walk into a room and like a theme song had to play, like a wrestler. What song would play for you?
Ooh. Oh, that's a good question. Um, Hmm. I think there's a song by Bikini Kill I really like called Rebel Girl. I think that one would probably be like my walking into the wrestling arena song.
That's a good pick. I like Bikini Kill myself. They're some good Riot Girl throwbacks. So thank you for that, Matt. That was a interesting question. All right. Well, Kelly, now that you spoke about security certifications, I know you've recently been interviewed on this subject, and you contributed to the blog we wrote about cybersecurity mentorship. I know this is a kind of like a passion area for you, having helped founded the Bishop Fox Cybersecurity Mentorship Program. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, why you think it's important, what you recommend people do if they're interested in finding a mentor, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So at Bishop Fox, we have like a formal mentor program. So that means a couple times a year, we send out a big survey and people can either sign up as a mentor or as a mentee. And they basically fill out like what they want to learn or what they want to teach. And then I work to kind of match them up with somebody that has a similar interest and kind of help guide them in that area. So we do it kind of formally here, which is nice because you can have lots of different mentors and switch around. It's a great way to meet people within the company, especially because like we're all remote now. We don't get to see each other as much. But before I joined Bishop Fox, I definitely had some mentors that were like pivotal for me to kind of grow in my career. And I've also mentored people, not part of work, just outside of work. And like over the course of them learning and a couple years of working together, they actually work at Bishop Fox now. So it's been a great way for me to kind of help learn myself, get jobs in the industry, and then also kind of bring people in behind me as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know the mentorship program is pretty popular at the company. So yeah, thank you for that. So, all right. See anyone from the audience have questions right now? Or I can go ahead and keep asking.
Quick question.
Oh, okay. Shoot.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, thanks. I was just wondering if there are some application pen testing skills or concepts, related security concepts that you feel are overlooked or undertrained? Things that are surprisingly valuable currently.
That's a really good question. I mean, I definitely think there are application security concepts that like maybe they're more advanced or we don't see as often. Um, so there's a lot of stuff out there that could potentially be really great areas to dive into. One that my local hackerspace just did a series on that was awesome was HTTP request smuggling, which is a really cool topic. And there's kind of always new, interesting techniques that have kind of come out to push that one forward. At Bishop Fox, we've had some really cool research come out in that area. Um, but like really any vulnerability, I feel like you can go dive really, really deep into. Like I've also seen some cool research come out of Bishop Fox recently around XSS. And we had a really awesome post. I think Chris Davis actually presented recently in RedSec on like lexical parsers and kind of exploiting differences in them to get XSS where normally there would be protections to kind of prevent it. So there's not like one thing that jumps out to me as like, oh, everyone should know this. And I don't see it enough. But it's more like you can go really, really deep in lots of individual vulnerabilities and topics. So it's really like the depth that I see people go that's what's surprising to me.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And if you're like looking for resources, the like just in terms of like being really well rounded and having good knowledge in web app, the Web Application Hackers Handbook is kind of like the go-to resource. And I know it's like more than 1,000 pages, but if you know that, then I would say like you have a pretty good handle on AppSec.
Yeah, I've heard that book mentioned several times in the past. And we actually have a blog post about security books we recommend. I think that might be on the list. If it's not, it should be. But yeah, thank you for that. And all right, if there's no other questions from the audience, I can keep going for now.
I have one.
Awesome.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm the kind of guy who really despises the idea of getting certified to get credibility, to be honest. But
Yeah.
well, I just go kind of radical in my approach by reading and practicing what I just read. So, would you recommend? I don't know. Do you find this approach practical in your opinion, or should I go or find a path that can get me, somewhere in the middle, not to the extreme edges of the
Mhm.
learning approach?
Yeah, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from because I didn't have a lot of professional experience. And so it was really hard for me to like demonstrate competency and that I could actually do the work. Certifications are just one way, but I think your way is totally valid as well. You just want to make sure you have a way to show people that you know what you're talking about. And that might just be during a technical interview, but there's some other stuff you could do too that I think would definitely help. So if you're whatever you're learning, if you are writing about it and sharing it with the community, that's something I definitely look for when I'm interviewing people of like, is this someone maybe who has a blog where they're posting CTF write-ups, they're posting, I know Hack the Box has some rules, but like maybe retired machines that you're allowed to write up or VulnHub or, anything like that. Or maybe you're just using tools and you learn a cool trick or you run into a weird bug and you post something about that on a blog. I think those types of things like really show that not only are you doing the work, but that you're kind of giving back to the community, that you can be a leader, teacher, and help other people. So there's some like kind of tie-in stuff you can do that shows you kind of know what you're doing, you're practicing, you're getting hands-on keyboard experience, but not necessarily that like shelling out thousands of dollars for a cert.
No, it's a great question. Thank you for that. All right. See if anyone else has anything. Otherwise, I've got my questions on standby.
Tell us one of your favorite Bishop Fox stories, Kelly.
Favorite Bishop Fox stories. There's a
There's
lot.
so many.
I know. I don't know. I think one of my favorite Bishop Fox memories is we had a company Christmas party at the San Francisco office, and there was a photo booth at the Christmas party, but it was like insanely overpriced, like $8 for a photo strip or something like that. And so, just in kind of messing around and playing with it, we found that there was basically a way to like unlock a hidden keyboard. And we were able to like basically, you know, completely exploit this fun device and then print all of these amazing photo strips. So I have really, really great photos in my office of kind of all of my coworkers from this really fun night where we, found a vulnerable photo booth in the wild.
What happens when you work with hackers?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Bishop Fox, Kelly, what eventually brought you to Bishop Fox?
Um, there were a couple of things that were really interesting to me. So as like an art dealer, I was looking for a place that maybe saw people a little bit differently, right? And one of the things I read about Bishop Fox was there was this public report about some medical devices, so like a pacemaker that was controlled via radio signal. And one of the consultants that was working on that previously had been a doctor, had been like an emergency room surgeon. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That's someone from like a very non-traditional background. So if they would take a doctor hacker, maybe they would take a weird art dealer hacker like me. Um, but there was also just cool projects that Bishop Fox was putting out. So that was around the time of the Danger Drone going to DEF CON. And I love gadgets and drones. So that was super intriguing to me. But there was just like lots of really cool public thought leadership that Bishop Fox was doing and like building lots of really cool hacking tools as well that I just thought was awesome. And I knew, oh man, that would be like my dream job if I could work there.
Thank you for that, Kelly. It's funny that you bring up the medical device report. I remember when that came out. I think it was like MedSec or something. It was, I believe, like late 2016. But yeah, that was some really interesting research. So yeah, one of the researchers on it was formerly an emergency room physician. Well, Kelly, when it comes to working in cybersecurity, what's one thing unexpected you've encountered during your career here?
Unexpected thing. Um, I mean, I think before I got into security, I generally thought that the world was like a pretty safe place and that, these big like public exploits and like companies getting hacked into is relatively rare. And now that I see it from the inside, I have like completely the opposite view. And it's a little hard to not be super cynical about security. But it was really, really surprising to me how many companies, like products that I was using every day, had problems in them. So I think that was actually, it's scary, but also really rewarding because now that I'm part of the industry, I can kind of help work to make some of those things better and, fill up those security holes.
Some and yeah, it's interesting too, like when you actually work in security, seeing how many devices we use every day are actually vulnerable to exploits and whatnot. All right. Does anyone from the audience have questions right now?
Um, um,
Alan
hi.
here.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. So I already asked two questions, so you go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's not a problem. Hi, can you hear me well?
Yep.
Thanks. So my question is that did you have imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Yes, I definitely have had imposter syndrome. If someone tells you like they don't have imposter syndrome, it's probably a sign that they're a jerk, than that they're like really full of themselves. So I don't think you ever completely get over imposter syndrome, but after you gain experience and you just kind of do these things for a while, you start to realize that maybe you are sort of kind of good at something. So, like, I'll give you an example. I remember when I first started at Bishop Fox, there were like certain people here that are just god tier hackers where I was like, oh, I'll never be as good as them. And I felt a lot of pressure that I had to know everything. I had to be good at programming. I had to know reverse engineering. I had to be good at crypto. I had to know web app and network and hardware and mobile. And I just felt like absolutely everything related to security, it was expected of me to know it. And so, of course, if you have those expectations, like you're just going to feel awful. But I was on a project with one of these people who was this like insanely super smart, talented hacker. And I found a really, really cool issue that caused a big exposure that they didn't find. And part of it was because I had a lot of familiarity with hardware. So I was like really comfortable soldering onto really fine devices. Maybe like because I didn't know a ton about how things worked, I didn't have some preconceived notions or I wasn't making assumptions and I was willing to try things that were a little outside of the box. And ultimately, I found something they didn't find. So it kind of made me realize like, even these people that we all look up to that are just simply brilliant and amazing, they have weaknesses too. They don't know everything. And so as I kind of grew up from a baby hacker into a, older, more mature hacker, I realized that I don't have to be good at everything. And there are areas that are interesting and energizing for me that I wanted to specialize. So that's where I focus my time. And still to this day, like I am not super great at crypto, right? Like I know the basic principles, I can tell you industry best practices, but like if you want me to explain some of the math behind it, no way am I going to be able to do that. And I think it's like you don't ever get over imposter syndrome, but you start to get more realistic expectations about your own abilities and what other people expect of you because everyone else isn't expecting you to be great at everything.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's a fantastic question. I think we were just talking about in the chat, like, imposter syndrome is so universal. I think everyone has it to some degree. Someone else had a question too, I think. So feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, well, you mentioned something about a couple of domains in cybersecurity like web apps, crypto, and such. And I think some, you know, segment of the community in cybersecurity, underestimate or underrate some of the fields because they kind of see themselves, yeah, I'm really good at web apps, so I'm gonna just, uh, somehow that you can kind of say step on other people's interests and for instance say exploit development, which is an area that I'm really interested in, that I spent and still spending an immersive amount of time learning how to use the GDB debugger and the netwide assembler and the syntax and the Go language itself also. So is exploit development that's less interesting as it used to be, or do you think it has, um, higher, how do I say it? Higher, I don't know, a higher, perhaps an influence or impact later in the
Mhm.
future?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think the internet was created so they can argue with people and just kind of be dicks on the internet and find things to fight about. So you might just see some of that of like people saying, well, my corner of InfoSec is better than your corner of InfoSec. And I don't like, obviously, that's not right, right? They're all important. Exploit development is definitely important. And I just think when you have people that are throwing shade like that, feel free to ignore them. Exploit development's definitely really cool. The one thing that you might see with like kind of these different specializations within InfoSec is what the job actually looks like is very different, right? So like exploit development is something that is a really relevant and useful skill, but in a consulting company like Bishop Fox, you may not be put on a project for long enough to go really, really deep in depth and develop an exploit. But if that was kind of your primary job, if you had a more like research focused job, or if you were just doing independent exploit development where you're selling exploits, uh, then you could spend a lot more time on it, right? So people who are sitting in these different sides of the industry with different jobs, of course they're going to have different opinions on what skill set is better because that's what's better for them in their workplace and their environment. So there's different kinds of jobs for every specialization. And I would say at Bishop Fox, like web app is a lot of what we do. At like, 70% of what we sell probably falls under web app. And so it's just really more common. My specialization was hardware, and that's a lot more rare. We definitely don't sell as many of those projects. So whenever people are like, oh, what area do I go into? People are telling me certain areas are good or bad. It might not be that they're good or bad. It just might be how many jobs there are in that area or how easy it is to get into. Because for things that are like really specialized and there's not as many opportunities, that may be what some people are trying to steer you away from.
That was a great question, and I definitely agree with Kelly. There are definitely some people out there that just use the internet to be very negative about things, but yeah. Well, Kelly, I know you touched on this earlier, but you mentioned that you're really interested in gadgets and hardware hacking. Is there anything at the moment like you're particularly keen on in that area?
I just got a Flipper Zero, which is a really cool tool that kind of was pioneered on Kickstarter and just recently released. And it does a bunch of different stuff that's really neat. So it does like RFID and NFC tags. It also does like sub gigahertz signals. So that would be things like your garage door opener, or if you have, like, in my house, I have remote controlled fans. So I've programmed all of the signals for my fans and my lights into this thing. And it also does infrared. So, like, it could control your TV if you have an infrared remote control. Or I have some also like infrared lighting in my house. So I've been kind of programming those things in. So it's just like a really cool, fun multi-tool that I've been playing with lately that I think is really interesting. And since it's kind of new and flashy in the hacking community, people are developing some new modules for it and doing a lot of kind of like extension of the regular firmware. So like I just downloaded on mine all of the Nintendo amiibo so I can like emulate an amiibo with this device. I don't actually have to buy one. So now I have all of the Animal Crossing villagers that I could ever want thanks to this Flipper Zero. So that's been really fun for me lately to play with.
Yeah, that sounds rad. That sounds really, really cool. And RFID hacking, a topic close to Bishop Fox's heart. Well, as far as like SDR stuff goes and radio hacking, are you doing anything with that area at the moment?
So the Flipper Zero is definitely within the radio hacking world. And in the past, I've done some research into like car key fobs. When I first started, I was like had this dream that I could go into a garage and send a signal out of my radio and like set off every car alarm in the parking lot. That's probably not as realistic, but I have been looking into basically some restaurant pager systems. So, like when you go into a restaurant and they put you on a waiting list and they hand you, a little plastic hockey puck that buzzes and beeps and lights up when your table is ready. I've been looking at some of the signals from one of those systems, and it's definitely way more feasible to write a program that sets off all of the buzzers at once, which was close to my dream, but not quite it.
That's still really cool though. Like walk into like an Applebee's and then like set off all the pagers. That would be pretty
Yes,
fun.
create chaos at Chili's.
Oh, see, there you go. I can get behind that. All right. Does anyone from the audience have questions right now?
I have another question about SDR.
Sure.
Is there any sort of, whether it's a site or person, YouTuber, anything for a good way into learning more about SDR? Because it just seems like another one of these big topics.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So there's a couple of things I'll recommend. So I actually have given a presentation called Ham Hacks and a couple different conferences that's recorded. I'm sure Britt will drop a link for it for you. And that's kind of a good intro to SDR of like, here's some of the technical terms you need to know. Here's some of the equipment you might need. Um, I would also say that a really great way to kind of just start learning radio concepts in general is to look into ham radio. So I got my ham radio technician license or whatever the equivalent hobbyist radio license is in your country. And the resource that I really like for learning about that stuff is called hamstudy.org. And it basically has like practice tests and questions if you're going for your certification. So you can learn about stuff like just the different frequencies, wavelengths, bands. And then if you also like really just kind of want to get hands on, I would say the gateway drug to SDR is to get yourself a little RTL SDR dongle. You can get them on Amazon for 25 bucks. They come with a couple little antennas and you can't transmit with them, but you can definitely still receive with them. So you can start listening to signals that are going on in the world around you and using the software and the tools like GQRX or Universal Radio Hacker, and really just like getting hands on with it because it's complicated. It's a topic you can go really, really deep into. But the magic of SDR is just that it's always around you, these signals, and as soon as you start kind of looking for them, you get to kind of unlock some of that magic.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, SDR is a super fascinating world. So, and I did drop the ham hacks links into the chat for anyone who's interested. So, Kelly, outside the world of radio hacking and the relevant area, what are some of your favorite pen testing tools?
Favorite pen testing tools. I mean, I think like Burp Suite is probably the like bread and butter of AppSec testing. But the thing that I like about Burp Suite is the extender of just kind of plugging in different extensions, writing extensions, being able to do interesting things with that. So, in terms of like favorite extensions, I really like Turbo Intruder, Param Miner, AutoRise. There's a couple really good ones for like JWT testing. Those are the ones that kind of come to mind immediately. And like maybe like non-web app related tools, I really like Crack Map Exec. Better Cap is another one for like Bluetooth that definitely has been really handy and has a really pretty interface. God, there's so many good tools. I'm sure I'm going to think of like 5 more as soon as we end this that I really love as well. But those are probably a couple of my favorites.
Yeah, feel free to, if you think of anything after this, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll happily pin them for you. So.
Perfect. Cool.
All right, I did get a question before the AMA that I'll go ahead and share with you now. Where do you rank writing on your list of must-haves for a pen tester?
Ooh, okay. So the other part of my backstory that I'll share with you guys is I didn't study computer science in undergrad. I was an English major, and I actually wanted to be like a science fiction novelist. That was kind of my career plan when I was younger. Um, so writing is definitely a topic that's super close to my heart, and I think is actually really important. So especially when you're a pen tester and you're a consultant, your actual hacking only is for a week or a couple weeks, but like the report is the thing that lives forever, and it's like the story of all of the cool and hard work that you do. So I would say writing is probably um, definitely one of the more important skills you can have as a consultant and a pen tester. I would put it in like top 5, and considering that it's a non-technical skill, I think that's saying a lot.
Thank you for that, Kelly. And I agree, writing is extremely important. I think it's a bit of an underrated skill, to be honest myself. All right, and I know this next question, I think you've touched on it a little bit before, but what are some of your favorite go-to security resources, be it in any topic?
I mean, I touched on some from when I was learning of things like Over the Wire has really cool war games, and they're always adding fun things to it. Uh, I would say if you're not getting the newsletter TLDR that is one of my favorite resources because Clint is always adding new, really cool things, especially things for like learning new hacking techniques. Like I just saw one that was a CI/CD pipeline vulnerable environment. So it's called CI/CD GOAT from cybersecurity. I thought that was pretty neat. And then on YouTube, I really love Live Overflow. I would say like I always watch his videos and I find them super interesting.
Yeah, I love TLDR myself. I think it's a great newsletter, and Clint is awesome. If you're not following him on Twitter and you're active on there, you definitely should. So. Does anyone else have any questions at the moment? All right, I will go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Britt mentioned writing earlier as a must-have skill that a pen tester must have. So, if one wants to work as a pen tester or in AppSec, what would be other soft and hard skills? Would you say that are key?
Yeah. I I think communication skills in general are really important. So verbal communication, like outside of just writing, so being able to do public speaking and explain technical topics to non-technical people is one of the biggest parts of being a pen tester because the person who pays for the pen test doesn't always kind of understand the results of it, but it is their job to put the fixes into practice and to decide what to fix, when to fix it, how to prioritize it. So being able to communicate those things to somebody who maybe doesn't understand the ins and outs of Burp Suite, right? And being able to kind of put technical topics in down to earth, reasonable terms is a really big skill. So we play a game a lot at Bishop Fox called the analogy game, where it's explain a vulnerability to me like I'm your grandmother. So you can't use any technical words. Grandma doesn't know how to use the computer. What would be like an analogy for cross-site scripting or SQL injection? And this is a game that's really useful in kind of getting you to think about technical topics in new and different ways so that you're comfortable speaking publicly and you're comfortable kind of connecting the right and left side of your brain. And I would also say if you have like a security community you can get involved in and give a technical talk at for practice, that's a really great idea. Or Toastmasters is another really good organization that basically is focused on public speaking. So I would say that is another resource you could use to improve in that area. And then in terms of technical skills, that really is going to kind of depend on what your area of focus and specialization is.
Neat. Thanks.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll go ahead and ask another question if nobody else has anything. So, Kelly, what would be your advice to people that are new to InfoSec?
Gosh, there's so much advice that I have. Well, I think the most important thing is to put yourself out there, right? Just to not write yourself out of opportunities just because you're new to the industry. So I know that when I was just getting started, I was like afraid to even apply for a job because I saw this giant list of requirements and I thought, oh, if there's 10 requirements, I'm meeting two of them. But once I actually started to get serious, I realized that when you look at a job listing, the things that they're asking for, it might even say requirements on there, but like really it's a wish list. And they don't always know who the best person is going to be for the job. So don't eliminate yourself from the running before you even try. Like let them do that and do your best to kind of win them over and sell yourself. I would also say like writing a resume and just practicing that side of writing your story, selling yourself, figuring out what your strengths are and also what your weaknesses are is a really good exercise, even if you're not sharing it and sending it out anywhere. So I always say, like, write your resume at least once a year so you can see how much you've changed and grown. And also, you can kind of have an idea of areas maybe that you're weak in and you need to have improvement. And I think we already talked about it a little bit, but with imposter syndrome and being new, I would also say just like be kind to yourself. You're not expected to know everything. And I think it can feel really overwhelming in the beginning that there's just so much to learn and you have no idea where to start. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to look dumb. The people that are the most successful are not afraid to ask a silly question. But, like, of course, if you're going to ask a question, please look for the answer first yourself and then ask somebody like once you're stuck or once you've kind of reached the extent of what you can do on your own. I think those would probably be my biggest pieces of advice for people that are new in the industry.
That's fantastic, and I agree. Like I just said in the chat too. Like I update my resume once a year, even though I'm not like on the technical side of things. Still think it's a great exercise to like reflect on what you've done and like how you're developing professionally. So yeah, that's some awesome advice. We did get some questions from the chat, so I'll go ahead and share those. The first being, what do you think is the future of our industry?
Ooh, the future of our industry. Huh. Well, I know a lot of people will probably say, like, oh, there's going to be a lot of automation and we're going to have programs, but I always think, especially pen testing, will have a human element. If if cybersecurity was a problem that we could solve with a program, we already would have done it. And it's kind of the creativity and ingenuity of the human spirit that's at the core of hacking and what will kind of always keep all of us in the job. But I see, I mean, I definitely see a big trend of moving away from like point in time assessments where companies just get pen tested for like 1 week out of a year to doing things kind of on a more continuous or regular basis. That's something we're doing a lot of at Bishop Fox. So I could see that as a big kind of industry changer. I also see defense is getting a lot smarter. So I'm seeing a lot of our clients do things with AI and machine learning. So they're kind of training these modules on what attackers actually do to kind of block a lot of the, let's say, the like simplest and easiest attacks, all of the low hanging fruit. So I think that at least at a base level, security is going to be getting continuously better over time. But it's hard to say where the industry is really growing. I'm sure there will be some big curveballs that when we look back on this recording a year or two, we'll be like, man, Kelly really missed this thing.
Yeah, Kelly, you're telling me you're not psychic? All right. Well, yeah, I agree with you though about the continuous security. I think that's kind of like the trend things seem to be moving toward in the industry. So that was a great question. Thank you for that, Crypto Derp. And now fielding a question from Nightbane. Um, I know you can't probably go into much specifics because this is a public conversation, but what would you consider your greatest hack?
Mhm. Great hack. Um, I mean, I remember, gosh, this was several years ago now, but I remember being kind of a junior pen tester and being put on an external network pen test for a major Fortune 500 retailer. And I was really mad when I was put on this project because I thought it was really unfair the way that they scoped it. They kept the scope like really small and they kept the goals really big. They were basically saying that they wanted me to kind of take over the company, but I could only look at this one tiny part of their external network. And when I started, I felt like it was and that I would never get in. But I did find a system that, like, really simple, stupid hack of it just had default credentials on it. And I was able to deploy a malicious war, get a reverse shell, and then this system turned out to have a tunnel inside to their corporate network from their cloud provider and it was an entirely flat network. So it was pretty trivial to basically take over the whole company, find the credit card numbers for all of their users, find the encryption key for the credit card numbers for all of their users, take over their Active Directory, get domain admin, all from an external pen test. So I think that was probably the most exciting for me and kind of one of those times where I realized, like, man, maybe I do sort of know something about this. And I saw how, one person could have a really, really big impact. And I think really we just got lucky that I found this before someone else did.
Yeah, that's huge. Holy like crap. Well, I think we're getting close on time. So, does anyone have any further questions? Well, I'm happy to kind of wrap things up. Kelly, do you have any parting thoughts or anything that we didn't discuss you'd like to touch on?
Parting thoughts. I would say I mean, we're all here, right? Because we're into secret knowledge, right? We're into those things that nobody else knows that kind of make us a little bit like superheroes. So, one thing that I've always done that has kind of served me really well is to keep a hacking bucket list of all of the things that I would love to get a chance to hack into one day. So I would just encourage people, like when you're looking into the world around you, to always have that kind of curious mind of like, where are the secret knowledge and where are the cool things that you could add to your hacking bucket list? Because I think that will help motivate you to study in the areas that you're really interested in and ultimately make the biggest leaps in your knowledge and make the biggest impacts.
That's a fantastic idea. All right. Does anyone else have any further questions? Okay. Here's a question from the chat. What was a hack that never came to be?
Oh man, there's so many. Like there are so many things that like you get really close to getting working and for whatever reason you just can't, right? Like um I'll give you an example. I had a company that had an application running Spring Boot and they had their Spring Boot actuators exposed. So these are like endpoints on a web app that let you control certain configurations of like the underlying server and application. And I could do a lot of really cool stuff with it, but I could not get a shell for the life of me. They had locked certain things down, or they didn't have certain dependencies that I would need to exploit serialization issues or all these other known things. But even though that was kind of like the shell that got away, I was still able to develop some really cool, novel server side request forgery using the environmental variable endpoint. So I didn't get the shell, but I ultimately was able to get an SSRF that disclosed AWS credentials through the metadata instance. And it led to me being able to basically look through all of their S3 buckets and see like photos of the developers inside their home that they had uploaded as test images and some really kind of like funny loot in that story. But that for me is the shell that got away that I still think about sometimes of like, man, I wonder if there was another way to RCE that thing that I missed. Awesome. Well, I know we're running up on the end of our time. Britt, are there any other questions from chat you wanted to ask?
No, I'm not seeing anything, and I'm happy to wrap things up if nobody else has any questions. Thank you for your time, Kelly. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was definitely a really cool, good conversation, and you all had some awesome questions. Hopefully I was able to give some good advice and some answers that are helpful for you.
Yeah, this was wonderful, and thank you everybody for the questions. And yeah, I've been sharing links in the chat, and I'm happy to drop in some more for the book blog that we mentioned, and as well any further resources that Kelly's shared and haven't shared yet. So, all right, thank you everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Bye, everyone.